correct usage of language in a pandemic is often the difference between mass panic and a clear understanding of the dangers posed. In recent months, South Africans have heard about strains and variants, vaccine studies and vaccine rollouts. They've also heard about the first and second waves and surges in infections. But what does it all mean, and do semantics matter during a pandemic? Professor Mosa Moshabela is the University of KwaZulu-Natal's Acting Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Research and Innovation, and he joins us now via our video line. Prof, it's great to have you with us on the show, and I think it's so interesting that we're talking in this discussion on the issue of semantics at the same time when the World Health Organization says, you know, it didn't take very long for the body to use the word pandemic. It already sounded its highest available alert on the 30th of January, but it was the countries that were slow to react. What's your response to that story before we get to our discussion, Prof?
Michelle, thank you. Good morning to you and to your viewers. I think that when we get to this stage, it's always everybody is going to try and clear itself of any wrongdoing. And to be fair, I think it's unnecessary for the WHO to try and blame countries, because then that's what it's going to translate into. I do think that they did announce international concern, an outbreak of international concern, and they also then announced later the pandemic. But it is not fair to blame countries on that. I do think that countries have responsibility to prepare, and they should have prepared even before the WHO announced the pandemic itself, given the trend that was going on. And that is just based on surveillance. We lack adequate disease surveillance in different continents and countries. If we had that, then we wouldn't have had a problem. Some of us started preparing long before the WHO announced the pandemic, because we could see the pattern that was going on.
Yeah, I mean, let's hope that despite what the WHO is saying, that there are still lessons that have been learnt from the body's own response to the pandemic for the next time this happened, hopefully in the not too near future.
And Michelle, you are absolutely right, because there's also been a lot of confusion. So just recently, they've also kind of said to us that the work that they've done in China, it demonstrated that the outbreak could not have started in a lab. And now, yesterday, they announced that they have not taken that hypothesis off the table. And that is confusing. In the past, they have said that the virus is spread through airborne, it's not spread through airborne transmission, and they went back to saying it's spread through airborne. We understand they're navigating uncertainty. Nobody knows for sure, but then we shouldn't be pointing fingers.
Yeah. So, Prof, let's talk about semantics in the midst of a pandemic. And I want to begin perhaps with what was the light at the end of a very dark tunnel for us, and that's the beginning of our vaccination rollout plan in the country. The Johnson & Johnson Sisonke vaccination program, it was dogged from the beginning with a lot of talk around a lack of proper communication from government, and there is talk now that that indeed could have led to vaccine hesitancy and other issues as well.
Yeah, no, and I think, I have to say that when we cautioned about the use of language, people didn't listen. And this is the problem, because then there is certain use of language that may not be of consequence, but there's other use of language that is certainly of consequence. And so this distinction or poor distinction between what is a research study and a rollout, on the surface, when you understand the overall objective of making vaccines available, it may not matter in the greater scheme of things. But actually, in the way that is communicated to people, it matters, because a study can actually mean that you are still testing whether the drugs work or not. If you're not clear in your communication, you'll confuse people. Whereas in this case, it was already proven that it works.
Yeah.
But they can still continue with 3B to test whether there are other effects that they can still monitor on a larger scale that can inform what happens in the rollout. But then now to call that a rollout means that the mechanism of delivery is driven by government, which is a standard service delivery, which was not the case. And this then caused a lot of contribute to the mistrust that is already there in society, now leading to what we call vaccine hesitancy. These are things not to take for granted.
Yeah, and this is an issue, in fact, that we've discussed plenty of times here in studio, the issue that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine still had to go away for final approval, that the rollout was part of a clinical study in South Africa. And I guess the question, Prof, is, do we need to know that as ordinary South Africans, as ordinary citizens? Do we need to know this is a clinical study versus this is a rollout? And I suppose the risk is that if government isn't forthcoming about the details surrounding vaccine rollout, it could then face criticism that it wasn't playing open cards with South Africans either. So which is it?
Michelle, one has to understand the context in which they are operating. If we are operating in peacetime and we all love each other, we all trust each other, and it's unity and there are no agendas, and I don't know if that world exists, then it wouldn't matter because people would trust.
Yeah.
But the context that we are operating in, everybody should know that you leave out information, you're not transparent enough. Anything that comes out is breaking news, and it's going to be used to drive the divisions that a whole lot of agendas are out there to try and drive. We know that. This is South Africa. So we cannot risk not necessarily disclosing this information fully, even if it is just for the purpose of full disclosure, just so that you avoid a controversy later. Because then now, if you don't do that, you end up with a situation where you say, well, the public doesn't need to know. Fine. Later on, it breaks out, information comes out, people say, oh yeah, you're treating our people as guinea pigs.
Yeah.
How do you respond to that? It takes so much time cleaning up that from a PR perspective when you could have avoided it. And now the consequences are more than just PR. It can result with people not getting doses that they need that are potentially life-saving. This is a matter of consequence. It's not just a matter of simple language. It's about ensuring trust and building trust.
Yeah. And I suppose, Prof, who gets to decide then, if we're talking, if we're talking semantics, who gets to decide what the public gets to know and what is left out?
Yeah, and for me here, I think that, again, it's knowing your audience, knowing the context. I think in South Africa in general, during a pandemic, we have seen that people were, I went from a point of thinking people are hungry for information. And I went to a point where I was thinking people are desperate for information. And that transition, even for me, was quite big. And so we cannot assume that people do not need to know. It's better to put the information out. And then we can then work backwards if people don't need to know anything. But if they then start asking, it's a different issue. I have never seen this level of engagement in science in South Africa. Even with HIV, we didn't see this much level of engagement with science. We are at a whole new level that I don't think that anyone is in a place to say that they know what people should know or what people shouldn't. You shouldn't do that. You should put information out. And government has tried. The problem is that scientific information comes with a lot of jargon.
Yeah.
But when you're now engaging the public, you need to break down the jargon and translate it in a way that is easy to understand.
And you need to be consistent. You can't say
exactly.
one thing one day and then change it the next day. And an example of that is this issue around a new strain of COVID-19, a new COVID-19 variant, a mutation of COVID-19. That as well, in what was a game changer in our fight against the pandemic, was a difficult thing to navigate.
Michelle, when this whole thing of a variant came out, I actually thought there's no way anyone is going to refer to this as a variant. I was like, people are just going to call it a strain, and once you call it a strain, it's going to cause a lot of panic, and people are just going to give up and feel helpless and powerless. But I have to say that after all the communication that's happened, I'm amazed by how much South Africans have taken it on. And I also saw how South Africans were calling other countries, to order for referring to a South African variant and so forth. I mean, For me, this was exciting to see, to say actually people are listening and people are working with the concepts that we are using. But the difference between a variant means and a strain means that with a variant, you can use the tools that you have. With a strain, it means you need completely new tools. That is a big difference, and that's what I mean when I say the difference between the two concepts. They mean that there are major implications to the use of those words. I have to say that there are other words, concepts that one might say, okay, it doesn't matter whether you use wave or surge. But when it comes to variant and strain, it's important for people to understand that here we are talking about a small mutation that is serious. Here we are talking about a serious mutation that has basically shifted the way we need to be doing things. Those two things, we need to navigate them carefully, which is where, biologically you will understand. But when you now have to translate that into public information, one needs to really be careful to make sure that they don't confuse people.
Yeah, absolutely. Prof, thank you so much for your time this morning. And I have to agree with you. I think government has done a great job of at least trying to navigate what really is an incredibly difficult arena. Professor Mosa Moshabela is acting VC for Research and Innovation at UKZN, as we talk about the importance of the use of language in the midst of a pandemic.